The Sign That Changed, Millbrook, a story of hope, community, and second chances. The autumn rain drummed against the windshield of Marcus Tuberville's silver pickup truck as he navigated through the streets of Millbrook, Alabama. The wipers moved in a steady rhythm, clearing away the droplets that obscured his view of the small town he'd called home for 37 years. As the owner of Tuberville Construction, Marcus had built half the houses in this community, watched families grow within walls he'd erected, and seen dreams take shape in foundations he'd poured. But today, something was different. As he approached the intersection of Highway 82 and Oak Street, his eyes caught sight of a small figure huddled beneath the flickering streetlight. A boy, no more than 12 years old, sat on an overturned milk crate, his thin frame barely visible under an oversized rain-soaked hoodie. In his trembling hands, he held a cardboard sign that made Marcus's heart clench. "Need help. Hungry. Please." The words were written in careful, childish handwriting, the ink beginning to run in the persistent drizzle. Marcus felt his foot ease off the accelerator as he drew closer, his construction-calloused hands gripping the steering wheel tighter. The boy's face was turned down toward the pavement, his shoulders hunched against both the cold and what Marcus recognized as the weight of shame that came with asking strangers for help. Marcus pulled his truck to the shoulder and sat there for a moment, engine running, watching the child through his rain-streaked windshield. In all his years in Millbrook, he'd never seen anything like this. Sure, times were tough for many families since the textile mill closed 2 years ago, but to see a child on the streets, alone and desperate, struck him like a physical blow. The boy looked up as another car passed, hope flickering briefly in his dark eyes before disappointment settled back in when the vehicle didn't slow. Marcus watched as the child adjusted his grip on the sign, his small hands red with cold, and something fundamental shifted inside the contractor's chest. Marcus Tuberville had always been a man of action. When the church needed a new roof, he organized the volunteers. When the elementary school's playground equipment broke, he showed up with his tools and his crew. But this was different. This was one child, sitting alone in the rain, and Marcus couldn't drive past. He turned off his engine and stepped out into the drizzle. His work boots splashed through shallow puddles as he approached the boy, who looked up with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Up close, Marcus could see that the child was even younger than he'd initially thought, maybe 10 or 11, with intelligent brown eyes that held far too much worry for someone his age. "Hey there, son," Marcus said gently, crouching down to the boy's eye level. "I'm Marcus. What's your name?" The boy hesitated, his grip tightening on his cardboard sign. I'm not supposed to talk to strangers," he whispered, but his voice carried the conflict of a child who needed help but had been taught to be cautious. "That's smart thinking," Marcus replied, respecting the boy's wariness. "Your parents taught you well. But sometimes, when we really need help, we have to take a chance on the kindness of others. What's got you out here in the rain, holding that sign?" The boy's lower lip trembled, and for a moment, Marcus thought he might cry. Instead, the child squared his small shoulders and looked Marcus directly in the eye. "My mom? She's been sick for a real long time. She lost her job because she kept having to go to the doctor, and now we don't have money for food. She doesn't know I'm here. She'd be real mad if she found out, but I heard her crying last night because she couldn't buy groceries." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "Where's your dad, son?" "He left when Mom got sick," the boy said simply, as if abandonment was just another fact of life to be accepted. "Said he couldn't handle it anymore." "What's your name?" Marcus asked again, his voice softer now. "Timothy," the boy replied. "Timothy Chen. We live over on Maple Street, in the little blue house with the broken fence." Marcus knew the house. He'd driven past it countless times, noting how the paint was peeling and the front porch sagged slightly. He'd even thought about stopping to offer some free repairs, but like so many good intentions, it had gotten lost in the busyness of daily life. "Timothy," Marcus said, rising to his full height, "I want you to put that sign down and come with me. We're going to get you some food, and then we're going to go talk to your mother." Timothy's eyes widened with alarm. "She can't know I was out here. She'll be so ashamed." "Oh, son," Marcus said, reaching out his hand, "sometimes when people are struggling, they need to know they're not alone. Your mom isn't going to be angry with you for trying to help. She's going to be proud that she raised such a brave, caring boy, but she's also going to be worried sick if you don't come home soon." After a long moment, Timothy reached out and took Marcus's hand. His small fingers were ice-cold and slightly sticky from the rain-soaked cardboard. Marcus helped him to his feet and guided him toward the pickup truck, the discarded sign left to dissolve in the rain. As they drove toward the center of town, Timothy pressed his face against the passenger window, watching the familiar streets of Millbrook pass by. Marcus could see the boy's reflection in the glass, young, vulnerable, but with a determination that reminded the contractor of his own childhood during harder times. "Where are we going?" Timothy asked quietly. "First, we're going to Murphy's Diner," Marcus replied, turning onto Main Street. "Sarah Murphy makes the best chicken and dumplings in 3 counties, and I suspect you haven't had a proper meal in a while. Then we're going to swing by Thompson's Grocery and pick up some supplies for your family. After that, you and I are going to have a conversation with your mother about how this community takes care of its own." Timothy was quiet for a moment, processing this unexpected turn of events. "Why are you helping me?" he asked finally. Marcus considered the question as he pulled into the parking lot of Murphy's Diner. The truth was complicated, a mixture of compassion, responsibility, and the recognition that sometimes a single moment could define not just one life, but an entire community's character. "Because, Timothy," he said, turning off the engine and looking at the boy beside him, "in a town like Millbrook, we're all connected. Your struggle is our struggle. Your success is our success. And sometimes all it takes is one person to stop and lend a hand to remind everyone else of what really matters." As they walked toward the warm, inviting glow of the diner, Timothy slipped his small hand into Marcus's larger one. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of trust, hope, and the beginning of something that would transform not just 2 lives, but an entire community's understanding of what it meant to be neighbors. The bell above Murphy's Diner door chimed as Marcus and Timothy stepped inside, shaking the rain from their jackets. The familiar warmth of the small restaurant enveloped them. The scent of home-cooked meals, the soft murmur of conversation, and the comforting clink of silverware against plates. Sarah Murphy, a woman in her 50s with graying hair pinned back in a practical bun, looked up from behind the counter and smiled. "Well, Marcus Tuberville, I haven't seen you in here for weeks," she called out, wiping her hands on her apron. Her expression grew curious as she noticed Timothy beside him. "And who's this young man?" "This is Timothy Chen," Marcus said, guiding the boy to a booth near the window. "He's had a rough afternoon, and I thought he might appreciate some of your famous cooking." Sarah's maternal instincts kicked in immediately as she took in Timothy's rain-dampened clothes and the way he seemed to shrink into himself. "Oh, honey, you look half frozen," she said, hurrying over with a steaming cup of hot chocolate. "Let me get you warmed up." Timothy accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping his small hands around its warmth. "Thank you, Mom," he said politely, though his voice was barely above a whisper. "Now that's good manners," Sarah observed approvingly. "Your parents raised you right." She caught the brief shadow that crossed Timothy's face and the almost imperceptible shake of Marcus's head. With the intuition that came from years of serving the community, she smoothly changed the subject. "What can I get you boys to eat?" "Bring us 2 plates of whatever smells so good back there," Marcus said. "And maybe some of your cornbread to go with it." As Sarah bustled back to the kitchen, Marcus noticed that several other diners had taken subtle notice of their arrival. This was the nature of small-town life. Everyone knew everyone, and a familiar face with an unfamiliar child was bound to generate interest. He saw Mrs. Henderson from the post office crane her neck to get a better look, and Bob Patterson, who owned the hardware store, glanced over from his corner booth. "Are people staring at me?" Timothy asked nervously, having noticed the attention as well. "They're not staring, son," Marcus assured him. "They're just being neighborly. In a town like this, people care about each other. When they see someone they don't recognize, especially someone as young as you, they naturally want to make sure you're okay." Timothy nodded, but still seemed uncomfortable with the scrutiny. He took a sip of his hot chocolate, and some of the tension left his shoulders as the warmth spread through his body. "Tell me about your mom," Marcus said gently. "What kind of work did she do before she got sick?" "She worked at the textile mill," Timothy replied, his voice growing stronger as he talked about his mother. "She was real good at her job. She could fix any machine that broke down. But then she started getting these real bad headaches, and her hands would shake sometimes. The doctors don't know exactly what's wrong with her yet, but she's had to have lots of tests." Marcus frowned. The textile mill's closure had devastated many families in Millbrook, but he hadn't realized that some workers had been dealing with health issues even before the shutdown. "How long has she been sick?" "About 8 months, Timothy said. "At first, she tried to keep working, but then she started having these episodes. She'd get really confused and couldn't remember things. Her supervisor was nice about it for a while, but then he trailed off, clearly not wanting to speak ill of anyone. Then they had to let her go," Marcus finished gently. Timothy nodded. "Mom said they couldn't keep someone who might get confused around dangerous machinery. She wasn't mad about it. She said they were just trying to keep everyone safe. But now she can't work anywhere because she never knows when she might have a bad day." Sarah returned with 2 steaming plates of beef stew, thick slices of cornbread, and a knowing look in her eyes. As she set the food down, she caught Marcus's eye and nodded toward the kitchen. "I'll be right back," she said meaningfully. Marcus understood. Sarah wanted to talk privately, which meant word about Timothy's situation was about to spread through the unofficial network of concerned community members that kept small towns functioning. "Go ahead and eat up," Marcus encouraged Timothy, who was staring at the generous portion as if he couldn't quite believe it was for him. "You need to get some food in you." Timothy didn't need to be told twice. He began eating with the careful control of someone who was genuinely hungry but had been taught good manners. Even so, Marcus could see how much the boy wanted to devour the meal. As Timothy ate, Marcus found himself studying the child's face. Despite his circumstances, there was something resilient about him, an inner strength that reminded Marcus of his own childhood. Marcus had grown up poor, the son of a single mother who cleaned houses to make ends meet. He remembered the shame of wearing clothes from church charity drives and the way his stomach would growl during long school days. But he also remembered the kindness of neighbors who found ways to help without making his family feel like objects of pity. "Timothy," Marcus said carefully, "when we go to see your mother, I want you to let me do most of the talking at first. Sometimes adults need to figure out how to help each other, and it can take a few minutes to work through the pride that keeps us from accepting assistance." The boy looked up from his stew, a piece of carrot on his fork. "Will she be mad at me?" "She might be worried at first," Marcus admitted honestly. "But once she understands that you were just trying to help your family and that you found people who want to help too, I think she'll be proud of you." Sarah returned from the kitchen with a concerned expression. "Marcus, I called my sister Janet over at the county health department," she said quietly. "She says there's been talk about some kind of environmental issue at the old mill. Several former employees have been getting sick with similar symptoms." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain outside. "What kind of environmental issue?" "They're not sure yet, but there might have been some chemical contamination that went undetected for years. Janet says they're putting together a medical program for affected workers, but it's going to take time to get it approved and funded. Timothy had stopped eating, his young face growing pale as he listened. Does that mean my mom got sick because of her job? Sarah knelt beside the booth, her voice gentle but honest. We don't know for sure, honey, but it's possible. What I do know is that if that's the case, there will be help available. Sometimes it just takes a while for the grown-ups to figure out how to organize it. In the meantime, Marcus said firmly, we take care of our own. Sarah, can you put together a care package of groceries? Nothing fancy, just basics. Bread, milk, some canned goods, maybe some of that soup you make. Already working on it, Sarah replied with a smile. And I'll bet if word gets out about this situation, half the town will want to contribute something. As if summoned by her words, the diner's door chimed again, and Pastor Williams from the Methodist Church entered, shaking rain from his umbrella. He was a tall, thin man in his 60s, with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor that had comforted countless parishioners through difficult times. Evening, Marcus, Sarah, he greeted them, then smiled warmly at Timothy. And hello there, young man. I don't think we've met. Marcus quickly explained the situation, watching as Pastor Williams's expression grew more concerned and more determined with each detail. When the story was finished, the pastor was quiet for a moment, clearly processing what he'd heard. Timothy, Pastor Williams said finally, I want you to know that you did exactly the right thing by asking for help. It takes courage to admit when we need assistance, and it takes even more courage to act on behalf of someone we love. Your mother raised a remarkable young man. Timothy's eyes filled with tears, but he managed a small smile. Thank you, sir. Now, the pastor continued, turning to Marcus and Sarah, what can the church do to help? We have a discretionary fund for exactly these kinds of situations, and I know our congregation would want to support this family. Let's start with immediate needs, Marcus suggested. Food, making sure their utilities stay on, maybe some help with medical expenses if there are any pending. And I think, Sarah added thoughtfully, we need to reach out to some of the other Mill families. If Timothy's mother is dealing with this illness, she might not be the only one. Pastor Williams nodded gravely. I'll make some calls tonight. We may be looking at a larger community health crisis, and we need to be prepared to respond appropriately. As the adults discussed logistics, Timothy finished his meal and found himself feeling something he hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not just the desperate hope that had driven him to sit in the rain with a cardboard sign, but genuine optimism that things might actually get better. Are you ready to go see your mom? Marcus asked gently. Timothy nodded, though Marcus could see the nervousness returning to the boy's eyes. What if she doesn't want help from strangers? Then we'll respect that, Marcus replied honestly. But we'll also make sure she knows that we're not strangers, we're neighbors. And sometimes, accepting help from neighbors is how we build the kind of community where everyone can thrive. As they prepared to leave the diner, Sarah pressed a bag of food into Marcus's hands. For their kitchen, she said simply, and tell Mrs. Chen that if she needs anything at all, she just needs to call. Outside, the rain had softened to a gentle mist, and the evening air carried the fresh scent of autumn. As Marcus and Timothy walked to the truck, the boy slipped his hand into the man's again, a gesture that was becoming familiar. Mr. Tuberville? Timothy said quietly. Yes, son. Thank you for stopping. I was getting real scared out there. Marcus squeezed the small hand gently. You don't have to thank me, Timothy. Sometimes we all need someone to stop for us. Today, I got to be that someone for you. As they drove toward Maple Street, neither of them could have predicted that this simple act of kindness was about to set in motion a series of events that would not only save Timothy's family, but reveal a community's capacity for extraordinary compassion and change an entire town's understanding of what it meant to be neighbors. The little blue house on Maple Street looked even more fragile in the soft evening light than Marcus had remembered. Paint peeled from its wooden siding in long strips, and the front porch sagged under the weight of years and deferred maintenance. A small garden beside the walkway showed signs of careful tending despite the family's struggles, neat rows of late-season vegetables that spoke to someone's determination to provide in whatever way possible. Timothy's steps grew slower as they approached the front door, his earlier confidence wavering in the face of having to explain his afternoon adventure to his mother. Marcus could feel the boy's anxiety through their clasped hands. "Remember," Marcus said quietly, "you did nothing wrong. You saw a problem and tried to solve it. That's what brave people do." Timothy nodded but still looked uncertain. "She's gonna ask a lot of questions." "Dee, that's what good mothers do," Marcus replied with a gentle smile. "They ask questions because they care." The front door opened before they could knock, revealing a woman in her mid-30s who was clearly Timothy's mother. Linda Chen had the same intelligent dark eyes as her son, though hers were shadowed with worry and fatigue. She was smaller than Marcus had expected, almost fragile-looking, with black hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and clothes that were clean but well-worn. "Timothy!" she exclaimed, relief flooding her voice. "Where have you been? I've been worried sick." Her eyes moved from her son to Marcus, taking in the stranger with the careful assessment of a mother protecting her child. "Who are you?" "Mom, this is Mr. Tuberville," Timothy said quickly. "He helped me today, and he brought food." He held up the bag from Murphy's Diner as if it were proof of good intentions. Linda's expression grew more guarded. "What kind of help did you need, Timothy? And why didn't you come home after school like you're supposed to?" Marcus stepped forward slightly, keeping his posture non-threatening and his voice calm. "Mrs. Chen, my name is Marcus Tuberville. I own a construction company here in town. This afternoon I found your son at the intersection of Highway 82 and Oak Street. He was holding a sign asking for help." The color drained from Linda's face, and she seemed to sway slightly on her feet. "Oh God," she whispered, reaching out to steady herself against the doorframe. "Timothy, you couldn't have—" "Mom, I'm sorry," Timothy burst out, tears starting to flow. "But I heard you crying last night, and I know we don't have money for groceries, and I just wanted to help." Linda sank down to her knees, pulling her son into a fierce embrace. Over Timothy's shoulder, Marcus could see her face crumpling with a mixture of shame, love, and despair. "Baby, you should never have... I'm supposed to take care of you, not the other way around." "Mrs. Chen," Marcus said gently, "may I come in? I think we need to talk." Linda looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. After a long moment, she nodded and stood, ushering them both inside. The interior of the house was small but clean, furnished with older pieces that had been carefully maintained. Family photos lined the mantelpiece, pictures of happier times when Linda looked healthier and Timothy was younger. Marcus noticed medical papers scattered on a small desk in the corner and prescription bottles lined up on the kitchen counter. "Please, sit down," Linda said, gesturing toward a worn but comfortable couch. "Timothy, go wash your hands and put that food in the kitchen. We'll eat in a few minutes." As Timothy disappeared down the hall, Linda remained standing, her arms wrapped around herself in a defensive posture. "I suppose you want an explanation," she said stiffly. "I want to understand how I can help," Marcus replied simply. "Your son told me about your illness and losing your job at the mill. That's a lot for any family to handle, especially on their own." Linda's composure began to crack. "I never wanted it to come to this. I've been trying so hard to keep everything together, to make sure Timothy doesn't suffer because of my problems. I had no idea he knew how bad things had gotten." "Kids are observant," Marcus said gently. "They see more than we think they do. And Timothy is clearly a compassionate, intelligent boy who loves his mother very much. He wasn't trying to embarrass you or make things worse. He was trying to solve a problem the only way he could think of. These, by begging on street corners, Linda said bitterly, sinking into a chair across from Marcus. My 10-year-old son was reduced to begging because I can't provide for him. Your son was showing incredible maturity and courage, Marcus corrected firmly. Do you know how many adults in similar situations would just give up? Timothy didn't give up. He took action. That says something remarkable about both his character and the values you've taught him. Linda was quiet for a long moment, processing Marcus's words. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer. I've been so scared, she admitted. The medical bills keep coming. I can't work regularly because of these episodes, and our savings are almost gone. I keep thinking about what will happen to Timothy if I can't get better, if I can't take care of him. What exactly are these episodes like? Marcus asked carefully. Linda rubbed her temples, as if even thinking about them brought on symptoms. It starts with severe headaches. Then I get confused and disoriented. Sometimes I can't remember simple things like what day it is or where I put important papers. My hands shake, and I get so dizzy I can barely stand. The doctors have run test after test, but they can't figure out what's causing it. Marcus frowned, remembering Sarah's conversation with her sister at the health department. How many other people from the mill are experiencing similar problems? I don't know, Linda replied. After I lost my job, I kind of withdrew from everyone. I was too ashamed to stay in touch with my former co-workers. Why do you ask? Because, Marcus said carefully, there might be more to your illness than random bad luck. Have you heard anything about possible environmental issues at the mill? Linda shook her head, but Marcus could see interest sparking in her tired eyes. A friend who works with the county health department mentioned that they're investigating possible chemical contamination at the mill site. Several former employees have been reporting symptoms similar to yours. You mean this might not be my fault? Linda whispered. All this time, I've been blaming myself, thinking that maybe if I'd taken better care of myself, eaten better, gotten more sleep. Mrs. Chen, Marcus said firmly, even if your illness is completely unrelated to the mill, it's not your fault. Getting sick isn't a moral failing, and needing help isn't a character flaw. It's just life being harder than anyone should have to handle alone. Timothy returned from the kitchen, having obviously been listening from the hallway. Does that mean you might get better, Mom? Linda reached out and pulled her son close. I don't know, baby. But what I do know is that we're not going to face this alone anymore. She looked up at Marcus. I don't know why you stopped to help Timothy today, but I'm grateful. More grateful than I can express. But I can't accept charity. I need to find a way to take care of my family myself. It's not charity, Marcus replied. It's community. And accepting help when you need it isn't weakness. It's wisdom. You'll have opportunities to help others when you're back on your feet. What kind of help are we talking about? Linda asked cautiously. Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious but kind. Immediate help with groceries and utilities to make sure you and Timothy have what you need while we figure out the bigger picture. Help connecting you with medical resources that might be able to provide better answers about your condition. Help navigating the system to see if you qualify for any assistance programs. And help making sure Timothy doesn't have to worry about adult problems while he's still a child. Linda was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with her pride and her practical needs. Finally, she looked at her son, who was watching her with hopeful eyes. Okay, she said quietly, we accept your help, but I want to be clear about something. As soon as I'm able, I'm going to find ways to give back to this community. I won't just take and take. I wouldn't expect anything less, Marcus replied with a smile. In fact, I'm counting on it. That's how communities work. We all take turns helping each other through difficult times. Timothy grinned and hugged his mother tighter. Does this mean we can buy groceries tomorrow? It means, Marcus said, standing up, that we're going to make sure your family has what it needs, starting right now. Mrs. Chen, I have some grocery bags in the truck from Sarah Murphy at the diner. Would you be willing to let me bring them in? Linda nodded, tears flowing freely now. But for the first time in months, they were tears of relief rather than despair. As Marcus headed outside to retrieve the groceries, he could hear Timothy chattering excitedly to his mother about the afternoon's adventure, the ride in the pickup truck, the warm meal at Murphy's diner, the kind people who wanted to help. Linda's responses were soft, but Marcus could hear the wonder in her voice, as if she was rediscovering the possibility of hope. When Marcus returned with the bags of food, he found mother and son sitting close together on the couch, Linda's arm around Timothy's shoulders. They looked up as he entered, and Marcus was struck by how much lighter the atmosphere in the small house had become in just a few minutes. There's one more thing, Marcus said, as he set the groceries on the kitchen counter. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to pick up Timothy for school, and then you and I are going to visit the health department together. It's time to get some answers about your condition and see what resources might be available. Linda started to protest, but Marcus held up a gentle hand. You're not in this alone anymore, Mrs. Chen, and the sooner we get all the help available to you, the sooner you can get back to being the strong, independent woman who raised such an exceptional son. As Marcus prepared to leave, Timothy walked him to the door. Mr. Tuberville, the boy said quietly, will you really come back tomorrow? I'll be here at 7:30 to drive you to school, Marcus promised. And Timothy, I'm proud of you for having the courage to ask for help today. That took more bravery than most adults ever show. Timothy beamed, and Marcus realized that this child had not only been saved from a desperate situation, he had been restored to his childhood, allowed once again to trust that the adults in his world would take care of the big problems while he focused on being a 10-year-old boy. As Marcus drove home through the quiet streets of Millbrook, he reflected on how a single moment of paying attention, of choosing to stop instead of driving past, had already begun to change 3 lives. What he didn't yet realize was that by tomorrow evening, word of Timothy's situation would have spread throughout the community, and the ripple effects of this one act of kindness would begin to transform an entire town's understanding of what it meant to be neighbors. Marcus arrived at the Chen house at 7:20 the next morning to find Timothy already waiting on the front porch, his backpack slung over his shoulder and his face bright with anticipation. It had been years since Marcus had seen such excitement in a child's eyes over something as simple as a ride to school, and it reminded him of how much the small gestures of kindness could mean when someone had been struggling alone. "Morning, Timothy," Marcus called out as he parked the truck. "Ready for school?" "Yes, sir," Timothy replied, practically bouncing as he climbed into the passenger seat. "Mom made me a real lunch today, a sandwich and an apple and everything. She hasn't been able to do that in weeks." As they drove toward Millbrook Elementary, Timothy chattered about his classes, his favorite teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, and the science project he'd been worried about finishing because they didn't have supplies at home. Marcus listened, struck by how quickly the boy's natural optimism had returned once the immediate crisis had passed. "Mr. Tuberville," Timothy said as they pulled into the school parking lot, "some of the other kids are going to ask questions about yesterday. What should I tell them?" Marcus considered this carefully. Small-town schools were breeding grounds for gossip, and he didn't want Timothy to feel embarrassed about his family's situation. "Tell them the truth in whatever way feels comfortable to you," he suggested. "You have nothing to be ashamed of. You saw your family needed help, you asked for it, and you found people who cared enough to respond. That's a story about courage and community, not something to hide from." Timothy nodded thoughtfully and headed into school with a confidence in his step that hadn't been there the day before. Marcus's next stop was the county health department, where he'd arranged to meet Linda. He found her sitting nervously in the parking lot, clearly having arrived early despite their scheduled appointment time. "Mrs. Chen," he greeted her as she got out of her small, older model Honda. "How are you feeling today?" "Nervous," she admitted honestly, "and still a little unsteady. I had a mild episode this morning, but better than I've felt in weeks, knowing that Timothy won't go to school hungry today." The health department was a modern, efficient building that served several rural counties. Janet Murphy, Sarah's sister, and a public health coordinator met them in the lobby. She was a professional woman in her 40s with a warm but businesslike demeanor, and she immediately put Linda at ease with her straightforward approach. "Mrs. Chen, I'm so glad you came in today," Janet said as she led them to her office. "I've been working with a team to investigate some concerning health patterns among former textile mill employees, and your case might provide some important pieces to the puzzle we're trying to solve." Linda's eyes widened. "There are others?" "At least 12 families that we know of, and possibly more who haven't come forward yet," Janet confirmed, settling behind her desk and opening a thick file. "The symptoms are remarkably consistent: severe headaches, cognitive confusion, tremors, and dizziness, all in people who worked in specific areas of the mill during the last 5 years of operation." "What could have caused something like this?" Marcus asked. Janet's expression grew serious. "We're still waiting for final test results, but preliminary findings suggest exposure to industrial solvents that may have been improperly stored or disposed of. The mill's environmental controls were apparently not as rigorous as they should have been, particularly in the latter years when the company was struggling financially." Linda sank back in her chair, processing this information. "So this really isn't my fault," she whispered. "Absolutely not," Janet said firmly. "And what's more, if our investigation confirms what we suspect, there will be significant resources available to help with medical treatment and financial support while you recover." "How long will that take?" Linda asked. "The investigation should be complete within 6 weeks," Janet replied, "but I don't want your family to struggle while we dot all the I's and cross all the T's. There are emergency assistance programs we can connect you with right now." Over the next hour, Janet walked them through a maze of forms and programs: medical assistance, food support, utility help, and temporary financial aid. Marcus watched Linda's demeanor transform as she realized that not only was help available, but that she had legitimate legal and moral claims to it. "There's one more thing," Janet said as they prepared to leave. "We're organizing a support group for affected families. It meets tomorrow evening at the Methodist Church. I think you'd find it helpful to connect with other people who understand what you're going through." As they walked back to their cars, Linda was quiet, clearly overwhelmed by the morning's revelations. Finally, she turned to Marcus with tears in her eyes. "Yesterday morning, I thought my world was ending," she said. "I was convinced I was failing as a mother, that I was weak and broken and couldn't take care of my own child. Now I find out that I'm a victim of corporate negligence, that there's help available, and that my son's bravery in asking for help has connected us with people who actually care about our welfare." "Sometimes," Marcus replied gently, "the hardest part of solving a problem is admitting that we have one and asking for help. Timothy did the hardest part yesterday." Linda nodded, then surprised Marcus by reaching out and squeezing his hand. "Thank you," she said simply, "for stopping, for listening, and for treating us like we mattered." "You do matter," Marcus replied. "Every person in this community matters." As Marcus drove back toward town, his phone began ringing. The first call was from Pastor Williams. "Marcus, I hope you don't mind, but word about young Timothy and his family has gotten around," the pastor said. "I've had 6 calls this morning from church members who want to help." Martha Henderson wants to organize a meal train. The Johnsons are asking about setting up a fund for medical expenses. And Bob Patterson says he has some construction materials that might be useful for fixing up their house. Marcus felt a warmth spread through his chest. That's wonderful, Pastor. Linda and Timothy could use all the support they can get. There's more, Pastor Williams continued. Sarah Murphy called and said 3 more families have come forward with similar symptoms to Mrs. Chen's. Apparently your actions yesterday gave other people the courage to speak up about their situations. The implications hit Marcus immediately. We might be looking at a much bigger community health crisis than anyone realized. Exactly. I'm calling an emergency community meeting for tonight at the church. Can you and the Chen family be there? Marcus's second call was from Janet Murphy at the health department. Marcus, I need you to know that after you left, we got 4 more calls from Mill families reporting symptoms. Your involvement yesterday seems to have opened the floodgates. People who were suffering in silence suddenly feel safe enough to ask for help. The third call was from Sarah at the diner. Marcus, honey, you need to get down here. We've got a situation that's both wonderful and overwhelming. When Marcus arrived at Murphy's diner, he found it packed beyond capacity. Every table was full, people were standing along the walls, and the conversation was animated and purposeful. Sarah waved him over to the counter, where she was coordinating what appeared to be a complex logistical operation. What's all this? Marcus asked, amazed by the energy in the room. This, Sarah replied with a grin, is what happens when a community realizes it has a problem it can solve. Word spread about Timothy and his mother and about the possibility that other Mill families are struggling with the same issues. People started calling each other, and before I knew it, half the town was organizing relief efforts. Marcus looked around the diner with wonder. He recognized faces from all corners of Millbrook society. Teachers and shop owners, retirees and young families, people who didn't normally interact, but were united by a common purpose. Martha Henderson, the postmaster's wife, approached with a clipboard and a determined expression. Marcus, we need to coordinate our efforts so we don't overwhelm these families or duplicate services. I've got 12 people signed up to provide meals, 6 families offering financial assistance, and Bob Patterson organizing a work crew to help with home repairs. That's incredible, Marcus replied, still somewhat stunned by the rapid mobilization. Doctor Martinez from the County Medical Center is here too, Martha continued. He wants to set up a free health screening clinic specifically for Mill families. And Janet Murphy says the state might fast-track their investigation if we can demonstrate organized community support for the affected families. Across the room, Marcus spotted Timothy's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, talking animatedly with several other educators. When she saw Marcus, she hurried over. Mr. Tuberville, I'm so glad to see you here. Timothy was completely different in class today, engaged, optimistic, participating in discussions. Whatever happened yesterday transformed that little boy. But I'm also concerned about other children who might be in similar situations. We're organizing a discrete support system through the school to identify and help families in crisis. The afternoon flew by in a whirlwind of planning and coordination. Marcus found himself at the center of an organically forming command structure, helping to coordinate volunteers, resources, and efforts. What struck him most was how naturally everyone seemed to know what needed to be done and how willing they were to contribute whatever skills or resources they had. By late afternoon, a clear picture had emerged. At least 15 Mill families were dealing with mysterious health issues and financial crises. The community had organized meal delivery for all of them. A fund had been established to help with immediate expenses, and volunteers were being scheduled for home maintenance and repairs. More importantly, the affected families were no longer isolated. A support network had crystallized around them, providing not just material assistance, but emotional and social connection. At 6 o'clock, Marcus drove back to Maple Street to pick up Linda and Timothy for the community meeting. He found them sitting on their front porch, Linda looking healthier than she had the day before, and Timothy practically vibrating with excitement. "Mr. Tuberville," Timothy called out as soon as he saw the truck. "Mum says the whole town is trying to help people like us." "That's right, son," Marcus replied, ruffling the boy's hair. "Sometimes it just takes one person being brave enough to ask for help to remind everyone else that we're all connected." Linda stood and smoothed down her skirt. She had clearly taken care with her appearance for the community meeting. "I still can't quite believe this is happening," she admitted. 24 hours ago, I thought we were completely alone in the world. "And now?" Marcus asked gently. Linda smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, Marcus could see hints of the strong, confident woman she had been before illness and crisis had worn her down. "Now I feel like I'm part of something bigger than myself, like Timothy and I belong somewhere." The Methodist church was packed when they arrived, with folding chairs set up in the aisles to accommodate the overflow crowd. Pastor Williams welcomed everyone and then turned the microphone over to Janet Murphy, who provided an update on the health department's investigation. "Based on the families who have come forward in the last 24 hours, Janet announced, we now believe that as many as 30 mill families may have been affected by environmental contamination. The state health department is expediting our investigation, and we expect to have preliminary results within 2 weeks rather than 6. A murmur of excitement rippled through the crowd. Dr. Martinez then stood to announce the free health screening clinic, which would begin the following Saturday. But the most important development, Pastor Williams said, taking back the microphone, is the way this community has responded. In less than 24 hours, we've organized comprehensive support for our affected neighbors. We've created meal trains, established emergency funds, organized volunteer work crews, and most importantly, we've made sure that no one has to face these challenges alone. The pastor's eyes found Marcus in the crowd. This all started because one person chose to stop and help when he saw a child in need. "Marcus Tuberville, would you come up here for a moment?" Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks as the crowd turned to look at him. He made his way to the front of the church, uncomfortable with being singled out. "I don't deserve special recognition," he said into the microphone. "I just did what anyone would have done." "But that's exactly the point," Pastor Williams replied. "You did what anyone would have done, but you were the one who actually did it. You stopped, you listened, you acted, and you treated a child and his mother with dignity and respect. Your actions reminded all of us of who we want to be as a community." The applause that followed was warm and sustained, but Marcus was more interested in the faces in the crowd. He could see the Mill families scattered throughout the church, no longer isolated, but surrounded by neighbors who had chosen to care. He could see children like Timothy, who would grow up knowing that their community was a place where people looked out for each other. Most of all, he could see the transformation in Linda Chen's face as she realized that she and her son were not just recipients of charity, but valued members of a community that had chosen to define itself through acts of mutual support and compassion. As the meeting concluded and people began to mingle, Marcus found himself surrounded by mill families wanting to thank him. But what struck him most was that they weren't just thanking him for his individual actions, they were thanking him for showing them that their community was the kind of place where asking for help was met with immediate, generous, and respectful response. "You know what the best part is?" Linda said as they prepared to leave the church. "Timothy asked me tonight if he could join the youth group. He wants to be part of helping other families who might need assistance. In 24 hours, he's gone from feeling like a burden to feeling like someone who can contribute to his community." Marcus smiled, remembering the frightened, desperate child he'd found holding a cardboard sign in the rain. That boy was gone, replaced by a confident young person who understood that both asking for help and offering help were essential parts of being a good neighbor. As they drove home through the quiet streets of Millbrook, Marcus reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. A community health crisis had been identified and was being addressed. Families who had been struggling in isolation were now surrounded by support networks. Resources were being marshaled not just for immediate relief, but for long-term solutions. But perhaps most importantly, Millbrook had rediscovered something essential about itself, that it was a place where people took care of each other, where individual struggles became community challenges, and where the simple act of paying attention to a child in need could catalyze extraordinary acts of collective compassion. The ripple that had started with Timothy's cardboard sign was now a wave of community engagement that would transform not just the affected families, but the entire town's understanding of what it meant to be neighbors. 6 months later, Marcus Tuberville pulled his truck into the parking lot of the newly opened Millbrook Community Resource Center, housed in the renovated wing of the old textile mill. The irony wasn't lost on him that the building that had once been the source of so much illness and economic hardship had been transformed into a beacon of community support and healing. The morning was crisp and clear, with the kind of bright spring sunlight that made everything seem possible. As Marcus walked toward the entrance, he passed the memorial garden that the community had planted in honor of the mill workers who had suffered from the environmental contamination. The garden was Timothy's idea, implemented through the youth group's community service project. Inside the resource center, the transformation was even more remarkable. What had once been industrial machinery and production lines was now a medical clinic, a job training center, a food pantry, and meeting spaces for support groups. The walls were painted in warm, welcoming colors, and large windows let in natural light that seemed to symbolize hope itself. Marcus found Timothy in the computer lab, where he was helping elderly community members learn to use technology as part of his volunteer hours. At 11 now, the boy had grown taller and more confident, but he still had the same intelligent eyes and caring demeanor that had first touched Marcus's heart. "Mr. Tuberville," Timothy called out when he saw his friend. "Come meet Mrs. Patterson. I'm teaching her how to email her grandchildren in California." Marcus shook hands with Bob Patterson's wife, whom he'd known for years. "How's the lesson going, Mrs. Patterson?" "This young man is the most patient teacher I've ever had," she replied with a smile. "He explains things 3 times if necessary, and never makes me feel foolish for not understanding." As Timothy continued his lesson, Marcus reflected on the remarkable changes in the boy's life. Linda's health had significantly improved once she began receiving proper treatment for the chemical poisoning. The class action lawsuit against the mill's former owners had provided substantial compensation for all affected families, allowing them not just to recover, but to thrive. More importantly, the crisis had revealed Timothy's natural leadership abilities and deep compassion for others. He had become a central figure in the youth group's outreach efforts, helping to identify other children who might need support and mentoring younger kids who were facing family difficulties. "Timothy," Marcus said when the computer lesson concluded, "your mom asked me to remind you about the town council meeting tonight. They're voting on the proposal for the new affordable housing development." Timothy's face lit up with excitement. "That's right, and they're going to announce the scholarship program for mill families' children too, aren't they?" "They are indeed," Marcus confirmed. "Are you still thinking about that engineering camp this summer?" "Yes, sir," Timothy replied confidently. "I want to learn how to design buildings and systems that keep people safe. After everything that happened with the mill contamination, I realized how important it is to have people who understand both construction and environmental protection." Marcus felt a surge of pride. The frightened child who had sat in the rain with a cardboard sign had grown into a young man with clear goals and a deep sense of social responsibility. Linda Chen appeared in the doorway of the computer lab, and Marcus was struck again by the remarkable transformation in her appearance and demeanor. The confused, fragile woman he had first met was now a confident advocate who served as the director of family services for the resource center. Her health had stabilized with proper treatment, but more importantly, she had found her calling in helping other families navigate crisis situations. "Marcus," she greeted him warmly, "I'm so glad you're here. We just got the final report from the State Environmental Agency, and the results are better than we hoped." She handed him a thick document with official seals and signatures. "The mill site has been completely remediated. The contaminated soil has been removed and replaced, the groundwater has been treated, and the air quality testing shows no remaining traces of the industrial solvents." "Oh, that's wonderful news," Marcus replied, flipping through the technical reports. "What about the other former mill sites in the region?" "That's the best part," Linda continued, her eyes bright with excitement. "Our case has become a model for environmental remediation and community response. 3 other towns with similar contamination issues have reached out asking for help implementing their own resource centers and support programs." Timothy joined their conversation, his face serious despite his youth. "Mom's been invited to speak at the state capitol about environmental justice and community organizing. The governor wants to use Millbrook as an example of how affected communities can take charge of their own recovery." Marcus shook his head in amazement. "6 months ago, you were worried about buying groceries. Now you're advising state government on policy issues." Linda laughed, a sound full of joy and confidence. "It's funny how life works sometimes. The crisis that almost destroyed our family ended up revealing strengths and possibilities we never knew we had. And it all started with this young man's courage in asking for help," Marcus added, putting his hand on Timothy's shoulder. "Actually," Timothy said thoughtfully, "it started with you choosing to stop and pay attention. I was sitting there for almost 2 hours before you came along. Lots of people drove past, but you were the one who saw me as a person who mattered." The 3 of them walked through the resource center, past the medical clinic where Dr. Martinez was examining former mill workers, past the job training center where displaced workers were learning new skills, past the support group meeting rooms where families continued to heal from trauma. In the main conference room, they found Pastor Williams setting up for the evening's town council meeting. The elderly minister looked up from his papers and smiled when he saw them. "Perfect timing," he said. "I was just reviewing the agenda for tonight's meeting. It's going to be quite a celebration." The agenda was impressive. The final approval of funding for 50 units of affordable housing, the announcement of full college scholarships for 12 mill families' children, the official opening of the job placement program that had already helped 63 people find employment, and the dedication of the memorial garden. "Pastor," Marcus said, "do you remember what Millbrook was like before all this happened?" Pastor Williams considered the question carefully. "We were a good community," he replied thoughtfully, "but we were also a community where people struggled alone. We had compassionate individuals, but we didn't have systems in place to identify and respond to crisis situations. We were reactive rather than proactive." "And now?" Linda asked. "Now we're a community that has learned to see," the pastor replied. "We've created networks that help us identify problems before they become crises. We've built systems that ensure no family faces major challenges alone. We've developed a culture where asking for help is seen as responsible rather than shameful, and where offering help is seen as a civic duty rather than optional charity." Timothy nodded enthusiastically. "At school we have peer counselors who are trained to notice when someone might be struggling. And every month, the youth group does neighborhood walks, where we just visit with elderly residents and families who might need assistance. It's not about providing services, it's about maintaining connections." As evening approached, The community centre filled with residents arriving for the town council meeting. Marcus was struck by the diversity of the crowd. Mill families and long-time residents, young people and seniors' house. Marcus felt a warmth spread through his chest. "That's wonderful, Pastor. Linda and Timothy could use all the support they can get. There's more." Pastor Williams continued. "Sarah Murphy called and said 3 more families have come forward with similar symptoms to Mrs. Chen's. Apparently your actions yesterday gave other people the courage to speak up about their situations." The implications hit Marcus immediately. "We might be looking at a much bigger community health crisis than anyone realized." "Exactly. I'm calling an emergency community meeting for tonight at the church. Can you and the Chen family be there?" Marcus's second call was from Janet Murphy at the health department. "Marcus, I need you to know that after you left, we got 4 more calls from Mill families reporting symptoms. Your involvement yesterday seems to have opened the floodgates. People who were suffering in silence suddenly feel safe enough to ask for help." The third call was from Sarah at the diner. "Marcus, honey, you need to get down here. We've got a situation that's both wonderful and overwhelming." When Marcus arrived at Murphy's diner, he found it packed beyond capacity. Every table was full, people were standing along the walls, and the conversation was animated and purposeful. Sarah waved him over to the counter, where she was coordinating what appeared to be a complex logistical operation. "What's all this?" Marcus asked, amazed by the energy in the room. "This," Sarah replied with a grin, "is what happens when a community realizes it has a problem it can solve." Word spread about Timothy and his mother, and about the possibility that other Mill families are struggling with the same issues. People started calling each other, and before I knew it, half the town was organizing relief efforts. Marcus looked around the diner with wonder. He recognized faces from all corners of Millbrook society, teachers and shop owners, retirees and young families, people who didn't normally interact, but were united by a common purpose. Martha Henderson, the postmaster's wife, approached with a clipboard and a determined expression. "Marcus, we need to coordinate our efforts so we don't overwhelm these families or duplicate services. I've got 12 people signed up to provide meals, 6 families offering financial assistance, and Bob Patterson organizing a work crew to help with home repairs." "That's incredible," Marcus replied, still somewhat stunned by the rapid mobilization. "Dr. Martinez from the County Medical Center is here too," Martha continued. "He wants to set up a free health screening clinic specifically for Mill families. And Janet Murphy says the state might fast-track their investigation if we can demonstrate organized community support for the affected families." Across the room, Marcus spotted Timothy's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, talking animatedly with several other educators. When she saw Marcus, she hurried over. "Mr. Tuberville, I'm so glad to see you here. Timothy was completely different in class today, engaged, optimistic, participating in discussions. Whatever happened yesterday transformed that little boy. But I'm also concerned about other children who might be in similar situations. We're organizing a discrete support system through the school to identify and help families in crisis." The afternoon flew by in a whirlwind of planning and coordination. Marcus found himself at the center of an organically forming command structure, helping to coordinate volunteers, resources, and efforts. What struck him most was how naturally everyone seemed to know what needed to be done, and how willing they were to contribute whatever skills or resources they had. By late afternoon, a clear picture had emerged. At least 15 Mill families were dealing with mysterious health issues and financial crises. The community had organized meal delivery for all of them. A fund had been established to help with immediate expenses, and volunteers were being scheduled for home maintenance and repairs. More importantly, the affected families were no longer isolated. A support network had crystallized around them, providing not just material assistance, but emotional and social connection. At 6 o'clock, Marcus drove back to Maple Street to pick up Linda and Timothy for the community meeting. He found them sitting on their front porch, Linda looking healthier than she had the day before, and Timothy practically vibrating with excitement. "Mr. Tuberville," Timothy called out as soon as he saw the truck. "Mom says the whole town is trying to help people like us." "That's right, son," Marcus replied, ruffling the boy's hair. "Sometimes it just takes one person being brave enough to ask for help to remind everyone else that we're all connected." Linda stood and smoothed down her skirt. She had clearly taken care with her appearance for the community meeting. "I still can't quite believe this is happening," she admitted. 24 hours ago, I thought we were completely alone in the world." "And now?" Marcus asked gently. Linda smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, Marcus could see hints of the strong, confident woman she had been before illness and crisis had worn her down. "Now I feel like I'm part of something bigger than myself, like Timothy and I belong somewhere." The Methodist church was packed when they arrived, with folding chairs set up in the aisles to accommodate the overflow crowd. Pastor Williams welcomed everyone and then turned the microphone over to Janet Murphy, who provided an update on the health department's investigation. "Based on the families who have come forward in the last 24 hours, Janet announced, "we now believe that as many as 30 Mill families may have been affected by environmental contamination. The State Health Department is expediting our investigation, and we expect to have preliminary results within 2 weeks rather than 6. A murmur of excitement rippled through the crowd. Dr. Martinez then stood to announce the free health screening clinic, which would begin the following Saturday. "But the most important development," Pastor Williams said, taking back the microphone, "is the way this community has responded. In less than 24 hours, we've organized comprehensive support for our affected neighbors. We've created meal trains, established emergency funds, organized volunteer work crews, and most importantly, we've made sure that no one has to face these challenges alone." The pastor's eyes found Marcus in the crowd. "This all started because one person chose to stop and help when he saw a child in need. Marcus Tuberville, would you come up here for a moment?" Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks as the crowd turned to look at him. He made his way to the front of the church, uncomfortable with being singled out. "I don't deserve special recognition," he said into the microphone. "I just did what anyone would have done." "But that's exactly the point," Pastor Williams replied. "You did what anyone would have done, but you were the one who actually did it. You stopped, you listened, you acted, and you treated a child and his mother with dignity and respect. Your actions reminded all of us of who we want to be as a community." The applause that followed was warm and sustained, but Marcus was more interested in the faces in the crowd. He could see the Mill families scattered throughout the church, no longer isolated, but surrounded by neighbors who had chosen to care. He could see children like Timothy, who would grow up knowing that their community was a place where people looked out for each other. Most of all, he could see the transformation in Linda Chen's face as she realized that she and her son were not just recipients of charity, but valued members of a community that had chosen to define itself through acts of mutual support and compassion. As the meeting concluded and people began to mingle, Marcus found himself surrounded by Mill families wanting to thank him. But what struck him most was that they weren't just thanking him for his individual actions, they were thanking him for showing them that their community was the kind of place where asking for help was met with immediate, generous, and respectful response. "You know what the best part is?" Linda said as they prepared to leave the church. "Timothy asked me tonight if he could join the youth group. He wants to be part of helping other families who might need assistance. In 24 hours, he's gone from feeling like a burden to feeling like someone who can contribute to his community." Marcus smiled, remembering the frightened, desperate child he'd found holding a cardboard sign in the rain. That boy was gone, replaced by a confident young person who understood that both asking for help and offering help were essential parts of being a good neighbor. As they drove home through the quiet streets of Millbrook, Marcus reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. A community health crisis had been identified and was being addressed. Families who had been struggling in isolation were now surrounded by support networks. Resources were being marshaled not just for immediate relief, but for long-term solutions. But perhaps most importantly, Millbrook had rediscovered something essential about itself, that it was a place where people took care of each other, where individual struggles became community challenges, and where the simple act of paying attention to a child in need could catalyze extraordinary acts of collective compassion. The ripple that had started with Timothy's cardboard sign was now a wave of community engagement that would transform not just the affected families, but the entire town's understanding of what it meant to be neighbors. The end